I'd like to, they're going to introduce themselves, but we have a great panel now. You know, we made a plug earlier on the PPPE process, and you all have a handout that is attached to your agenda on what that cycle looks like, or what, it's a continuum, I should probably say. We have here 3 directors from headquarters that are right in the thick of the whole PPPE process, and let me turn it over to Mike Stowe.
Well, actually, I'll go ahead and open up first and introduce myself, and then we'll go kind of down the line and open up for you. My name is Alan Bloom. I'm the DHS Budget Director. I've been here at the department for a little bit over 4.5 years. I'm retired Air Force after 27 years, and I've been doing budget and financial management work for my entire career since 1985.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jeff Bobich. I'm the Director of the Financial Management Division here in the Office of the CFO. I've been in this role for about 5 years. However, I've been in the greater department since day one. I had been at the Transportation Security Administration since 2002 until I came here to the department at the beginning of 2014. And earlier in my career, I had also worked as a civilian employee for the Navy Department and for a CPA firm at one time. And I'll tell you a little bit more when my turn comes about what we do in the Financial Management Division.
Okay. And good morning, I'm Mike Stowe. I'm the Director of Program Analysis and Evaluation. I'm also a retired Air Force officer. I had 32 years. I flew for a large part of that career and then became a programmer as we built Air Force budgets. And then it just became a kind of a natural transition to me to move over to the Department of Homeland Security to kind of run the programming process from the department level here. And so what we want to do is we're going to take you through planning, programming, budgeting, and execution very quickly. Now, I understand you had an earlier brief on this, so did Grace, I know it's Grace and John, I think, were doing the discussion earlier. Did they talk about, already tell you what PPPE is? Did you already get that theory already? Or did they just give you a plug on? Okay, so just very briefly. Planning, programming, budgeting, and execution is a system that was put into place in DoD. It actually, you may have heard about it starting with McNamara in the Kennedy administration. It actually began during World War II. They quickly realized that even though we had unrivaled industrial capacity in this country, that at some point the 100,000th or the 1 millionth ball bearing probably shouldn't be going to a tank, maybe it should be going to a truck, because for example, we provided 70,000 trucks to Russia as part of the Lend-Lease program, which is a great, significant contributor to the war effort. And they had to make decisions about competing resources, or competing demands on resources. And so that's really where the whole programming idea began, was trying to look into the future. You have a plan of some sort. You have only a certain number of resources available. You have to make decisions on where you're going to put those resources. So you budget for those resources, then you actually have to execute. And you have to monitor the execution and put controls in place to make sure that what you said you wanted to do and what you're doing, they actually pan out. And then of course you start the whole process all over again. So PPPE is a multi-year effort. Now if you look at this slide, and I think you guys have the slide as well, I'm going to walk through the years very quickly, but I will tell you that everybody in this room will be able to see yourself someplace on this slide. Some of you will see yourself in more than one place. This is kind of a timeline-driven thing here, but there are some of you in the room, so for example, the CAD folks, the cost analysts who are in the room, who work across all of the different cycles because they're really involved in a separate process, which is the acquisition life cycle. But they're very involved in our process too. They have touch points as well. You'll have touch points as well. But just saying that all of you should be able to see yourself in this slide somewhere. So starting from the bottom, an important point to get out of this is we all live in multiple years simultaneously. It's almost like a time machine when you're in CFO. So for example, we're wrapping up 2018. What fiscal year are we actually in? We're in 2019. But we're wrapping up, as Jeff will talk about, we're wrapping up some activities in FY18 for FY18. And even not just Jeff's work with the audit and the agency financial report, by the way, I should have changed that to agency financial report, not annual financial report, but not just there, but also in the annual performance report, which my folks are putting together, looking at how we've performed against the against the 4-year strategic plan that the department produces. So we're wrapping up 18. At the same time, I think everybody's aware, like I said, we're in 19, we're under a CR, everybody's looking toward early December to see are we going to get an appropriation continues, or going to be a government shutdown, but obviously we're in the time period where Congress would be appropriating, or should have already appropriated for 19, and Alan will talk about that. And then we're expecting, we'll begin discussions today in earnest with OMB during what's called passback, as far as, because now that's the FY20 budget. So we're in 19, but we're already getting ready. We have to get the request out. That'll be the president's budget that happens in, I guess, February. And you'll talk about that some more, but we'll be putting it out then. So some of you are going to be working that and eagerly awaiting passback today. And then even as 20 is being worked, we're actually looking out into the future and beginning the work that needs to be done to begin to build the resource plan for fiscal year 21 through 25. We build 5-year resource plans. And that's what we're responsible for in program analysis and evaluation, is working with the components to build a 5-year resource plan, looking ahead to basically looking about 2 fiscal years out. Not the one we're in, not the one that's about to be requested that Congress will start working on once the president does it in February, once we actually put it out, but actually talking about what's happening now. We're thinking about 2021 through 2025. And some of you might be involved in that now, already starting to build the requests that you're going to bring into the department in April. So for the 21 through 25 period, the way this works is, again, we have a strategic plan, we get a set of leadership priorities. Those priorities will be published as part of what's called resource planning guidance that normally should happen in November. It looks like it's probably going to happen, we think, in December. The resource planning guidance tells the components what they should be prioritizing based on senior leadership, and by senior leadership priorities, I mean the secretary and the deputy secretary. They have to then obviously pay attention to what the folks that are actually charged with accomplishing the mission of the component, so the commissioner, CVP, or whoever that is, so who they work for, they build these resource plans, balancing the resources against the money that we give them. And then in April, they'll submit those resource allocation plans to the department. We will gather them all together, we'll begin doing the assessment of them. PA&E has a piece of this, budget has a piece, CAD has a piece, and we will then highlight significant issues to leadership. Leadership will make decisions over the spring and into the summer on where money should move. They'll make decisions like, do we fully fund the request for wall? Do we fund additional technology for TSA, for example, for enhanced screening to meet certain threats? Whatever the case may be, we'll capture all those decisions together. And we do it, again, with a 5-year plan. Why? Because if I buy people, they have a tail. If I buy a ship or an airplane, it has a tail. In other words, once you buy it, it's just like if you buy a car, you're still going to put gas in it. You're going to pay for maintenance and all the other things that go with it. And so we have to be able to plan into the future. Never perfect, but at least, you know, we're able to start, we built this 5-year plan, and it just kind of shifts across the years. So, but we build the 20 through 20, in this case, we'll build the 21 through 25 resource allocation plan, release a final decision, and then we basically truncate it, and we take fiscal year 21, and we hand that over to budget. And then budget begins the process with the components, as Alan will talk about in a second, of getting something ready to submit to OMB and then to DFIN. So, and then we'll start the process all over again. But our focus really is on the out years. And the programmer's blessing has made you always live in the out years, because I don't really have to worry out there as much about the resource constraints as somebody does who's actually executing a budget. And so, and Alan will always tell you that I never give him a budget that's executable or defendable, and he has a lot of work to do after I get done with it. But, you know, that's Alan's problem. So it works really well. So we're really happy.
It's a love-hate relationship here.
But anyway, that's kind of what we do looking in the future, and I'm happy to take any questions on that as we go through this. There's a lot more detail to go into, but I want to give you plenty of time for questions, so I'm going to turn it over to Alan if you want to talk about it.
Sure will. So in about the June, July timeframe, Mike and his team is going to finish up the programming side of it. And so they hand us the FY, in this case, we'll talk about what's on my mind right now. We'll talk about FY20. So he handed me the FY20 budget then. The budget division then works along with all the components, and now we got to take the programming stage, and they determine what was funded. So we've now got to take that and say, look at it and say, okay, so which part of it was something they've always been doing in previous budget, and what's a pricing change? How much does it cost now more because of pay raises, just because of contract price increases? Which part of that budget can we justify just because it's sustaining the same level of business that we've always done, it just costs different? So that's called an adjustment to base. And we talk about that part of the budget. And then we talk about program changes. That's where the Good Idea Factory and all has come to life. And they decided the new things, well, whether it be we need more Border Patrol agents, whether we need more wall, those kind of things, more detention beds, all the kind of things that this department looks at. Also, additional CT machines for TSA, those things. And then we price those out. And then it's all about wrapping it into a story. So in September, we owed the OMB justification, we call it the OMBJ. We owed that in September. And it basically tells a story of what we've done with the budget for FY20 as it compared to the FY18 enacted and the FY19 President's budget. So that's kind of how you tell the original story. So in September, OMB gets that. We do hearings along with OMB. And so we have been going through that process now. And then today is the magic day for the Department of Homeland Security. We're going to get the OMB guidance, which is called Passback. Now that's the administration and the executive branch's review of our submission. And it's called Passback. They're going to pass back and they're going to tell us what they liked about our ideas, what they didn't like about our ideas, and how they're going to try to reshape that budget. And then by Friday, what we'll do as a department is we'll go through an appeal process, whether or not we agree with them. That's easy. On the things that we disagree, we appeal, and then they go through another process through December, which we reach final settlement, and they give us a set of numbers that tells us that is now going to be the department's budget. And then in December, we start working with the components again. Now we're going to build a congressional justification, kind of doing the exact same thing in the OMBJ, except now we're going to look at, because things have changed on what was funded, so you've got to relook at the adjustments to base, you've got to relook at the program changes, and any economic factors or things that might have changed since then. So then they'll update the congressional justification, and we'll get that to Congress in February. Yeah, I'll do it then. So then I'll kind of back up a year. Let's go to 19, since I don't have a bill right now. Right now, we did the 19 in February. We got congressional marks, both by the House and the Senate. If all else was working wonderful, they would do a conference position, and then they would come back and they would get together, they'd decide what it was, and they'd vote, and they'd give us a bill, and we'd have an appropriation on the 1st of October. I think I've seen that once in my 30-something years, so it's not very often that occurs. So right now we're under a CR that runs through the 7th of December. And if you're watching the press, you know there's a lot of controversy in our department. Majority of our controversy is over immigration issues. Immigration issues aren't new, and they just get a lot more publicity today. And so right now we're on a CR through December the 7th. We believe that our subcommittees are ready. In other words, they've done all their work, they've reached agreement. But there's a couple of big issues. You can imagine what they are. They can't decide at the subcommittee level or at the full committee level. It'll be leadership level of the Congress. The wall would be the biggest one of those. In FY19, we submitted a budget request for $1.6 billion for the wall. The president wants now $5 billion for the wall, so that makes some huge controversy. So we'll watch over the next couple of weeks and see if we get an extended CR, or if we get a bill, or if all else fails and we have a lapse in appropriation. You'll see the department executes a shutdown plan, and that way those employees who are deemed that they are essential for national security and public safety, they will come to work. The rest of us, oh wait a minute, the rest of you may not, and you may go home. But that's the way the process runs for the appropriation process. And then we'll turn it over to Jeff, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So once all that planning and budgeting is done, it comes time to execute the budget. And the term execution is kind of a loaded term, but what it really means is to spend the money. Now, the budget, regardless of what type of budget it is, whether it's an appropriated budget, as Alan just described, or a budget based on fees collected, or a budget based on reimbursable work, where an agency does work for other government agencies and charges them, regardless of how the funds are derived, the budget comes with a lot of strings attached. There are numerous laws, regulations, and policies that govern how we can and cannot spend our money. Financial Management Division in the broader financial management community across this department and in every department of government for that matter, is responsible for managing the spending or the execution of resources in accordance with those laws, regulations, and policies. And then, at the same time, reporting on that spending and reporting to internal audiences for management, decision-making, and tracking, reporting to external audiences. And I'll have another slide in a moment on reporting, but suffice it to say, much of what's done in the financial management community deals with reporting how we spend the budgetary resources which are made available to us through the planning and budgeting process which Mike and Alan just described. The ultimate, you can boil down the definition of financial management right there on the slide. It is managing and reporting on the execution of resources to ensure accountability. Accountability to Congress, to the executive branch, and ultimately to the taxpayers who provide the resources to support our operations. Turning to the next slide, financial management functions. Pretty much you can boil down financial management functions into three key areas: policies, systems, and reports. In terms of financial policies, we have in this department a Financial Management Policy Manual, or FMPM for short. How many of you are familiar with it? Can we have a show of hands? Okay, well, hopefully after this orientation it'll be 100% familiarity with it. The FMPM is online. We don't do any printed manuals anymore, but it basically defines how you can and cannot spend money, how you can and cannot execute your budget. Within the FMPM, we have chapters that outline all the budget execution rules, how to avoid Anti-Deficiency Act violations. We have chapters on grants, for spending money on grants, several chapters on travel, conferences, purchase cards, fleet cards, pretty much everything you can think of, even seized property and prizes. Believe it or not, if we have anyone from here from S&T, they occasionally have a scientific prize competition. We have a chapter in the FMPM that outlines the rules for that, just to show how detailed it is. If we were to print out all the text of the FMPM, and thank goodness we don't, you'd have a document about this high. So it's significant guidance that governs how we execute our budgetary resources. Systems, the second piece of the puzzle. In this department, we have 10 different general ledger accounting systems. All of those systems feed into a system called TIER, T-I-E-R, which we administer and operate out of our office. And TIER is a system that we use to consolidate financial data from across the department. Every component feeds data into TIER, and from TIER we produce all of our required external reports, as well as various reports for internal management. TIER is also the auditable system of record, and I'll talk in a little bit about the agency financial report and the audit report. TIER is the auditable system of record. It is the official source of the department's financial and execution data. And then the third piece is the reports. As I mentioned earlier, we have internal reports, external reports, congressional reports, treasury reports. Could go on and on. I could fill an hour talking about financial reports. It's not just how much you spent, although that's the bulk of the reporting, but we have reports that we're required to submit annually to the Treasury Department on topics such as debt collection, receivables, numerous other examples of reports that we produce. Travel, just last week we had to do this. How much did we spend, each component spend on travel in FY18 compared to FY17? Lots of special interest reports, and we use our TIER system as a source of record for those reports. Key regulatory guidance. For those of you who are new to the department but have been around the government service for a while, you're probably familiar with all of these. For those of you who are new, this hopefully is something you'll soon learn. I will highlight a few of the key guidance documents. OMB Circular A11, which is OMB's government-wide guidance on budget formulation and budget execution. Now, pretty much outlines much of what Alan just described, how you go about formulating the budget, and then it describes in all the detailed procedures for executing the budget. At one time, there were two separate circulars, but now it's combined into A11. Then we have OMB Circular A136. This is the instructions for, the instructions that each department must follow in producing its agency financial report and its audited financial statements. A136, updated each year. We have, stepping back in time, the Chief Financial Officers Act of 1990. This was a seminal piece of legislation, almost 30 years old now. And this required each department to produce financial statements which go in the agency financial report, and to have those financial statements audited either by the agency's IG or usually by an independent accounting firm under contract to the agency's IG. The CFO Act has led really a revolutionary change in government financial reporting. And once it was passed, it was many years before anybody could produce financial statements that could be audited. Now we've reached a point where every department is able to undergo and complete an annual audit, and almost all of them have been able to obtain a clean audit or an unmodified audit opinion. So a big step forward in government financial reporting, and it all goes back to that CFO Act of 1990. The Act also created the CFO position. I know you heard just a few moments ago from our CFO, or acting CFO, Stacy Marcotte, that when I joined the government service, the term was generally comptroller. CFO was a new word, the new term that came into form as a result of the CFO Act of 1990. And then the last regulatory guidance that I'll highlight is the GAO Green Book, and I wish I had one. It is literally a green book. And that is the standards for internal control in the federal government, and it outlines 17 principles. I could have a pop quiz if anyone could name the 17 principles, you get a prize, but there are 17 principles of internal control. And that is a framework for controlling how we spend resources. It also is a criteria for your annual audit opinion when the auditors review internal controls. Do you have proper segregation of duties? Do you have people who are sufficiently skilled and competent for the jobs they're assigned? That's all outlined in the GAO Green Book, the standards for internal control in the federal government. Those documents that I just described apply to every federal department and independent agency, and they form the framework over much of what we do in the financial management community. Moving on, talk a little bit more about the budget execution cycle. So it starts, as Alan said, with the appropriations legislation or continuing resolution, which is a result of the programming and planning process that Mike described earlier. Once you have funding, it is apportioned by OMB to the departments. So even if a budget was to pass on October 1st, you do not have the ability to spend it all on October 2nd or 3rd. It's apportioned, and there are quarterly limitations and various other limitations on when you can and cannot spend it. Then you have funds control. Funds control is done through your financial system, your general ledger system. 10 different GL systems I described earlier in the department. Funds control effectively are system functions that, if they work properly, are designed to prevent you from making an obligation that exceeds your budget authority. Commitment, obligation, and expenditure of funds, the three key terms as money moves through the spending process. First, you commit it, which is a firm administrative reservation of funds. Then you obligate it, which means you have a signed contract or other legal instrument obligating the government to spend that money. And then the expenditure of funds, which is effectively the outlay, the cash payment, cash out the door. That's your budget execution cycle right there. That is reported on monthly in a monthly execution report, or MER report, which goes to Congress. We generate that out of the tier system. It goes to Alan's office for review, and then they submit it to Congress the month following the month of it that's being reported on. So in late December, we'd submit the November report, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, we have Treasury reporting, which is pretty much all done online now through systems like GTAS. And this is where the department reports its spending to the Treasury Department. They consolidate it with the spending from every other department and agency. And then when you hear political numbers, such as we spent this much money last fiscal year, or the deficit was this large or this small last year, that is based on the reports which the U.S. Treasury Department generates, which is the compilation and consolidation of spending data from every department and government agency. A huge undertaking. At the department level, we produce each year an agency financial report. This is the fiscal 18 report. It is issued 45 days after the end of the fiscal year. So when Mike talked about, everyone's living in a different year at a different time, 19 has started, and we're working very hard the first month and a half of 19 to produce this report for 18. Here's the 17 report. Same process each year. We just issued our report on November 15th. If you want to look at it, it's online. And in the agency financial report, we have all sorts of good stuff. No, seriously, only an accountant would call it all sorts of good stuff. But we have a message from the secretary. We have performance data highlighting our key accomplishments, really the key accomplishments of each component in terms of mission accomplishment. We have the financial statements. We have other information. Other information would include information on improper payments, freezing the footprint, trying to reduce the amount of space we use, civil penalties and fines, which some components like the Coast Guard and TSA have authority to fine the public for violations. That's spelled out in here. Very detailed report, and I encourage all of you to go online and read it. And that's the DHS agency financial report. At the government-wide level, the Treasury Department will produce what's called the Financial Report of the U.S. Government, or FRUSG. That's going to be produced in February, this February coming up, for the year ended September 30th, 2018. And that effectively takes our report and combines it with everybody else, HUD, Transportation, DOD, Energy, and there you have the financial report of the U.S. government. Within the agency financial report is your audit opinion on the financial statements, as well as your audit opinion on internal control over financial reporting. The audit opinion on the financial statements measures, very simply, are your financial statements accurate or not? On that, the auditors were, I'm pleased to say, responded yes. For the 6th straight year, we have a clean opinion on the financial statements. The opinion on the internal control, second audit opinion is, are your internal controls all functioning effectively so that there's no risk of misreporting of financial data, of fraud, etc. Unfortunately, we do not have a clean opinion on internal control. We have material weaknesses in 2 areas, but we're working to resolve those. So that's an overview of the financial management function, which effectively really is your execution, your budget execution function, taking that budget authority, executing it in accordance with laws, regulations, and policies, and then reporting to OMB, to Congress, and ultimately to the taxpayers, the American public, on what we did with those resources and what we accomplished during the fiscal year. So with that, we will now take questions.
And don't worry, we do realize that we're standing in between you and lunch, and so you won't shock us, but if you have a question, please just let us know.
I have a question regarding the 5-year plans. Obviously, when we established like the FY 2015 through 2019 plan, things have changed a lot since that was established. What is the role of that plan at this point? Do those objectives and strategies still apply, or has that changed?
Well, the way it's supposed to work,
Can you repeat the question, sir?
okay, so he's asking the question about the 5-year plans and use the example of, okay, 2015 through 2019. A lot has changed since then, so what's the role of that plan now? And what we do really basically is, again, like I talked about, it's really kind of a cascading thing. So it's every year we build the next 5-year plan, and we make adjustments based on what has happened in life. So we make the president's budget request, for example, for FY20, and it gets shaped by OMB, of course. We make the request to Congress, but then Congress, of course, owns the purse. And so Congress will enact or appropriate money at a certain level to certain programs, and that will change. Yes, it has out-year impacts. Things like, changes in inflation have out-year impacts, the price of oil going up, whatever the case may be. A decision will be made that a new administration comes in and we have new priorities. And so every year it has to be adjusted. So really, you have, within the 5-year plan, you have much better fidelity as far as much better accuracy of what you'll be doing in the first couple of years. But the out years really provide, again, a plan, an acknowledgement, a way to look at, okay, as we're making decisions and we're making trades, what are, again, let's talk about tails, what are the impacts that are going to be hitting us in the future? Because if you're adding people, even though things are going to change, unless you get rid of those people, they're going to cost you money in the future. There'll be the inflation that goes with it as we get cost of living increases, or we get pay raises, whatever the case may be. So the plan from 15 to 19, so 19 looks probably nothing like we thought it would look like in 15. I won't say nothing like, it probably looks fairly close. We're probably fairly close as far as maybe the level of appropriation, but we have to make adjustments every year. But it's just a way of planning ahead to really inform, if you will, what's happening in the near years. I don't know if that answers it, or if you have another.
That's close enough.
This is a question for Jeff. For your system of record tier, how detailed can you get the reports out of that system? Meaning, are they at some activity level? Are they at appropriation level? And how detailed are these?
Sure. Tier data is at the level of appropriation by PPA, program project activity, and then by object class. And obviously by organization, by component. What we don't have is a breakout within each organization. For example, from ICE,